The clink of silver on porcelain was a language Zara understood. It spoke of money she didn't have, of a life lived behind soundproofed glass, high above a city that never slept. From their table at Murasaki, Tokyo sprawled below like a circuit board of pulsing light. She sketched the skyline in her Moleskine, the sharp angles of new construction, the graceful slope of a distant temple roof. It was a compulsion, this need to translate the world into lines and structure. It was how she made sense of things. Across from her, Chloe and Zoe, her two 8-year-old miracles, were meticulously coloring. Two identical faces, two sets of bright, curious eyes, two identical red dresses she'd splurged on for this celebratory dinner. It was the end of her 3-month architectural contract, a small but significant success. Chloe's worn teddy bear, Barnaby, sat propped against the water glass, a silent, furry sentinel. Zara's gaze drifted. 2 tables away, a man sat with a woman. He was Japanese, dressed in a suit so dark it seemed to drink the low light of the restaurant. It wasn't just tailored, it was engineered. It fit the hard lines of his shoulders and the lean strength of his torso with architectural precision. She didn't see his face clearly, just the sharp cut of his jaw and the way his hands rested on the table, perfectly still. They were elegant hands, long-fingered and stark against the white linen. They looked capable of terrible, deliberate things. His date, a woman in a dress that tried too hard, was doing all the talking. Her laughter was a little too loud, her gestures a little too wide. She was trying to fill a silence that the man seemed to cultivate around himself like a force field. He didn't move, didn't react. He just listened, his stillness a form of absolute control. Zara felt a prickle of unease. He moved like the room owed him space. Her phone vibrated in her purse, a frantic buzz from her project manager about a last-minute change to the blueprints. She sighed, pulling it out. "Just 1 minute, sweethearts," she murmured, turning slightly to shield the screen. It was always 1 minute. Her life was a collection of stolen minutes. While she was focused on the email, a small shift occurred. A whisper, a scuffle of chairs, the rustle of red cotton. When she looked up, her heart seized. Her table was empty. Barnaby the bear lay face down on the floor. Her blood ran cold. She scanned the room, panic a hot spike in her throat. And then she saw them, her daughters, standing beside the silent man's table. The woman was gone. He was alone. And Chloe, my brave, reckless Chloe, was looking up at him, clutching Barnaby to her chest. Zara was already moving, a choked apology forming on her lips. But she was too far away to stop the words that tumbled from her daughter's mouth, clear as a bell in the hushed restaurant. "Our mom said our real dad is a star in the sky," Chloe announced, the most dangerous-looking man Zara had ever seen. Zoe nodded beside her, a solemn echo. "Can you be our new dad?" The world stopped. The distant hum of traffic, the murmur of diners, the soft music, it all faded into a roaring silence in Zara's ears. She reached the table, her hands fluttering uselessly. "I am so sorry," she gasped, her voice tight with mortification. "Girls, come here."
"Right now."
Apologized to the gentleman. But the man didn't look angry. He didn't look annoyed. He finally lifted his head, and for the first time, Zara saw his eyes. They were dark, intense, and utterly unreadable. A small, white scar cut through his left eyebrow, a flaw in an otherwise perfect, severe face. His gaze swept over the twins, then landed on her. It was heavy. It was assessing. It felt like a physical touch. He ignored her apology. His attention was fixed on her daughters. "You are very brave," he said. His voice was low, a deep baritone with a gravelly edge, and it held no trace of amusement. He spoke as if bravery were a rare and valuable commodity. "Come on, you too," Zara insisted, her cheeks burning. She tugged gently on Zoe's arm. The man's eyes flickered back to her. He held her gaze, and she felt pinned by it, like a butterfly under glass. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. She told herself it was survival instinct, the primal fear of a predator, but another, more treacherous part of her recognized the pull of it, the sheer, gravitational force of his presence. "What is your name?" he asked. It wasn't a polite question. It was a demand for information, spoken with the calm certainty of a man who has never refused. "Zara," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, as if filing the name away in a place from which it could never be removed. "Zara," he repeated, and the way he said it was different. He said her name differently than anyone else had. It sounded like a judgment, or a verdict, and in that moment, Zara knew that her carefully constructed world of blueprints and bedtime stories had just been shattered. He had already paid for their meal. A silent, dismissive wave of his hand to the manager had settled it before Zara could protest. It wasn't a kindness, it was a transaction, a claiming of the situation. "It is late," he stated, his dark eyes fixed on her. "My driver will take you home." It was not an offer. The words were polite, but the tone was absolute. A refusal, she understood instinctively, was not an option. A cold dread coiled in her stomach. This was how it happened. One wrong step, one moment of bad luck, and you fell off the map of the normal world. The car was a black Maybach, its windows tinted to an opaque, menacing sheen. A man in a dark suit held the door, his face impassive. Inside, the scent of expensive leather and something else, cypress and smoke, filled the small space.
It was his scent, she realized.
Clean, sharp, and predatory. He sat opposite them, the cavernous interior of the car feeling suddenly small and airless. The girls, sensing the tension, were quiet, pressed close to her sides. "You are an architect," he said as the car pulled silently into the glittering river of Tokyo traffic. Another statement, not a question. Zara's heart hammered against her ribs. "How did you—" "Your portfolio was on the tablet you left at your table," he said, his gaze unwavering. The plans for the Minato Sky Tower. Ambitious. She had been so frantic to get the girls, she hadn't even realized. He hadn't just seen her. He had seen into her life. The drive was short, but the silence was long. He asked nothing else, and she offered nothing. When the car glided to a stop in front of her modest apartment building, 2 more men in dark suits were standing by the entrance. They materialized from the shadows, their presence a jarring intrusion into her quiet residential street. They bowed slightly as he exited the car. He had her investigated in the 15 minutes it took to drive across town. The thought was terrifying. This man's reach was long, his resources seemingly infinite. He walked them to the door of the building, the silent guards falling into step behind them. "You and your children will be safe tonight," he said, his voice a low rumble. It sounded like a threat. The next few days were a blur of nervous tension. Zara tried to force their lives back into a normal rhythm, but it was impossible. She felt watched. A black car was always parked down the street. When she took the girls to the park, a man reading a newspaper was always on the same bench. She was living in a cage she couldn't see. The threat, when it came, was not subtle. It was the screech of tires, the shatter of a shop window a few feet from where she and the girls were walking home with groceries. 2 cars, locked in a brutal chase, roared past them. One of the men in the pursuing car raised a gun. Time slowed. Zara's only instinct was to shield her children, to throw herself over their small bodies as the world exploded in a cacophony of gunfire and screaming. Then, just as quickly as it started, it was over. Men swarmed the street, moving with a chilling, lethal efficiency. She recognized them as the ones from outside her apartment. And, at their center, moving through the chaos, as if it were his natural element, was him, Ryota Takahashi. She had learned his name. It was a name whispered with fear and reverence in the city's hidden corners. He knelt before her, his immaculate suit untouched by the violence around them. His eyes scanned her, then her terrified daughters, searching for injury. His jaw was tight, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. "You are not safe here anymore," he said. They were moved that night, not to a hotel, but to a penthouse apartment in a skyscraper that pierced the clouds. It was a fortress of glass and steel, with panoramic views and security systems that looked like something out of a spy movie. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly inescapable. Later, after the girls had cried themselves to sleep in a bedroom that looked like a page from a fairy tale, he found her staring out at the city lights. "They were not targeting you," he said, standing behind her. "You were in the way. Collateral." The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. She flinched.
He saw it.
A flicker of something, regret, perhaps, crossed his face before it was gone. "I had a sister," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual authority. "She was younger than your daughters. She was caught in the crossfire of a disagreement. A failure of my father's security." He paused, his gaze distant, lost in a memory that was clearly painful. "I was supposed to be watching her. I failed to protect her. I will not fail again." That was it. The wound. The single crack in his marble facade. It wasn't just about power or control. It was about a ghost. A debt he could never repay. In that moment, Zara had a choice. The American embassy was a phone call away. She could claim duress, demand protection, and disappear with her daughters back into the anonymity of her old life. She could run. But she looked at the rigid line of his shoulders, at the torment lurking deep in his unreadable eyes, and she saw fear that mirrored her own. Running now, she realized, would make them a target for his enemies. The paradox was sickening. The most dangerous place for her and her children was also the safest. Beside him. She turned to face him. "We'll stay," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was a frantic drum. "Not for you.
For them.
You will keep them safe. That is the price." He stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a single, sharp nod. The deal was struck. He was in the kitchen, a space of gleaming chrome and black granite, checking the communications panel hidden behind a cabinet. She was making chamomile tea, a small act of normalcy in a world gone mad. Her hands trembled as she poured the hot water. He turned, and the kitchen, which had seemed so large, suddenly shrank. He was only a few feet away. The scent of cypress and smoke was stronger here, a constant reminder of his presence. He moved toward the counter to get a glass of water, his path taking him directly behind her. To get to the cabinet, he had to reach past her. His arm, encased in the fine wool of his suit jacket, brushed against her own. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through her entire body, a startling, unwelcome current of heat. She froze, the teapot held aloft. He stopped, his hand hovering over the glasses. She made the mistake of looking up. His face was inches from hers. She could see the faint lines around his eyes, the sharp edge of the scar, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. The silence in the kitchen was no longer empty. It was a living thing, thick with unspoken questions and dangerous possibilities. He was so close, she could feel the warmth radiating from him. She could see the conflict in his eyes, a war between his iron control and something wilder, something he fought to keep caged. He noticed a stray curl that had escaped her hastily tied bun, and his gaze softened for a fraction of a second. His fingers twitched, as if fighting the urge to reach out and tuck it behind her ear. Then the mask slammed back into place. He took his glass, filled it with water, and stepped back, breaking the spell. The room could breathe again.
So could she.
But something had changed. A line had been drawn, and they had both, silently, acknowledged it. Zara found it by accident. Ryota was in a meeting, and she had wandered into his home office, a space of dark wood and stark minimalism, looking for a book to distract herself. On his desk, a single file lay open. The name of a rival family was stamped on the tab. Curiosity, a dangerous and foolish impulse, got the better of her. She opened it. Inside were surveillance photos. Men in suits, men in cars, men standing on street corners. And one of them she recognized. Her blood turned to ice. It was Kenji Tanaka, a project lead from her firm. The one who had been a little too friendly, a little too interested in her work, asking questions about her life that had seemed innocent at the time. He was smiling in the photo, shaking hands with a man whose face was a portrait of casual brutality. The breath left her body. The threat wasn't random. His enemies weren't just shadows in the city. They were embedded in her own world. They had been watching her long before the blind date, long before her daughters had asked their impossible question. She wasn't collateral. She was the target, a pawn to be used against him. The realization was a cold, sickening wave. The cage she was in wasn't for her protection. It was to control the bait. The attack came 2 days later. It was calculated, personal, and aimed at her heart. She was with the girls in the manicured park across from the skyscraper, two of Ryota's men standing at a discreet distance. It happened in a flash. A delivery van screeched to a halt. A man jumped out, grabbed Zoe, and ran. Time fractured. Chloe's scream was a shard of glass in the air. The guards were moving, shouting, drawing weapons. But Zara was closer. Primal instinct took over. She didn't think. She acted. She swung the heavy, stainless steel thermos from her bag, putting all her weight behind it. It connected with the side of the man's head with a sickening crack. He stumbled, his grip on Zoe loosening for a critical second. It was the only opening the guards needed. Chaos erupted. The man was subdued, but not before he lashed out, a small, wicked-looking knife catching Zara's forearm. The pain was sharp, electric. She clutched Zoe to her chest, her own blood warm and slick against her skin, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. Ryota arrived moments later. He didn't run. He moved with that same terrible, controlled speed. The look on his face was something she had never seen before. It was beyond fury. It was a cold, absolute deadness that was far more terrifying. He looked at the gash on her arm, at Chloe's tear-streaked face, at Zoe trembling in her arms. And something in him seemed to shatter. The dispassionate crime lord was gone, replaced by a man witnessing his worst nightmare play out for a second time. They didn't take the man to the police. He was brought to a warehouse down by the docks, a place that smelled of rust and seawater. Ryota expected her to stay in the car, to shield her eyes from the necessary brutality. He underestimated her. She followed him inside, her arm bandaged, her expression grim. The man was tied to a chair, his face a mask of terror. Ryota's men stood back, waiting for the order. Ryota turned to her, his eyes questioning. He expected her to plead, to cry, to appeal to a mercy he didn't possess. Zara walked forward until she was standing in front of the captured man. She met his terrified gaze and held it. Then she turned her head slightly, her voice calm and clear in the echoing space. "He saw my daughter's face," she said to Ryota. "He knows her name." It was not a plea for mercy. It was not a cry for vengeance. It was a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of the world they now inhabited. A world where witnesses were liabilities and loose ends were fatal. She had crossed a line. The woman who sketched skylines and believed in the elegant logic of blueprints was gone. In her place was a mother who would burn the world down to protect her children. She would not ask for the violence, but she would not stop it either. Later that night, in the sterile silence of the penthouse, he cleaned the cut on her arm himself. His men had been dismissed. The girls were asleep. It was just the two of them, surrounded by the glittering, indifferent city. His touch was firm but surprisingly gentle as he applied the antiseptic. The sting of it was nothing compared to the tension humming between them. "You should be afraid of me," he said, his voice a low rasp. He didn't look at her, focusing on his task. "I am," she admitted, her voice quiet but steady. She met his gaze as he finally looked up. "But I'm more afraid of what happens to them if I'm not with you." His hands stilled. His thumb brushed against the soft skin of her inner arm, a touch that was both intimate and unintentional. He held her gaze, and she saw the truth of his own private war in his eyes. "Before you," he said, the words sounding as if they were being torn from him, "the world was simple. Duty and debt, honor and blood." He looked away, toward the sleeping city. "You and your children, you are a complication. One I find myself unwilling to solve." It was the most honest thing he had ever said. Not a declaration of love, but something far more potent. A confession of weakness. An admission that she had become a variable in his brutal equation that he could no longer control. The next day, the enemy responded. A courier delivered a small, elegant wooden box. One of Ryota's men intercepted it, scanned it, and brought it to him. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a dead canary, its neck broken. Beneath it lay a photograph. A picture of Chloe and Zoe, sleeping peacefully in their beds. It had been taken through the window, from an adjacent building. The message was unmistakable. We can reach them whenever we want. He is not your shield. He is your cage. The war was no longer his. It was hers. Ryota's plan was simple and brutal, a final, surgical strike to decapitate the rival clan. He would meet the leader, Kenji Tanaka, on neutral ground, the top floor of the unfinished Minato Sky Tower. Her building. Her design. He intended to lock her and the girls in the penthouse, surrounded by a small army. He intended to handle it alone. She would not allow it. You're walking into a trap, she told him, standing before him in his office. She'd unrolled her own copy of the tower's final blueprints across his desk. Kenji thinks he's smarter than you. More than that, he thinks I'm a helpless victim, a damsel you've locked away.
He'll use that.
His pride is his weakness. This is not your concern, Ryota said, his voice cold, dismissive. The hell it isn't, she shot back, her finger jabbing at the schematics. He is using my building, my work, to try and kill you. To terrorize my family. That makes it my concern. She pointed to a network of service corridors and ventilation shafts. You see a battlefield. I see a system. I know every weakness, every blind spot, every hidden path in that tower. You protect us with guns. Let me protect us with my brain. You can't see the board the way I can. He stared at her, a long, silent battle of wills passing between them. He saw the iron in her spine, the fierce intelligence in her eyes. She was not the woman he'd met in the restaurant. Fear had forged her into something new, something that mirrored the steel in himself. What do you propose? He asked, his voice low. The top floor was a cavern of exposed steel and raw concrete. The city lights a distant, silent audience through unfinished walls of glass. It went wrong, just as she'd predicted. It was an ambush. Kenji had more men than anticipated. Ryota and his soldiers were pinned down, a barrage of gunfire echoing through the vast space. Zara was not there. She was 2 floors below. In a building management control room, she had accessed using a service elevator and an override code she herself had designed. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the firefight on a grainy security feed. Her hands flew across a touchscreen, her architectural knowledge a weapon far more precise than any gun. She isolated the sector, where Kenji's reinforcements were waiting. With 3 taps, she triggered a localized fire alarm. Emergency shutters slammed down, sealing the corridor. Sprinklers erupted, creating a wall of water and chaos. It was controlled, strategic sabotage. The disorienting shriek of the alarm and the sudden confusion bought Ryota the exact window he needed. He moved through the chaos, a dark wraith dealing in death, turning the tide of the battle with brutal efficiency. She had not fired a single shot, but she had saved him. In the aftermath, amidst the dripping water and the dying echo of the alarm, he found her. He was bruised, his suit torn, a smear of blood on his cheek, but he was alive. He walked toward her, his steps sure and steady. He didn't look grateful. He didn't look relieved. He looked at her with a raw, absolute recognition, as if seeing her for the very first time. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him. He reached out, his hands surprisingly gentle, and framed her face. He just looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers.
Zara, he said.
Just her name. But it was a vow. It was a claim. It was the striking of a final, unbreakable deal. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. They are not the only ones who need a father, he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. I need you. He was a king admitting he could not rule his own empire alone. For a man like Ryota Takahashi, it was the ultimate surrender, the deepest vulnerability. The world she had known was gone forever. Kenji Tanaka was dead. The threat was neutralized. But the victory was paid for an innocence. She could never go back to sketching buildings and pretending the world was made of clean lines and simple rules. She had seen the ugliness that held it all together, and she had chosen her place within it. Weeks later, they stood in the raked gravel garden of his private estate. It was a place of serene, ancient beauty. The air was cool, smelling of damp moss and pine. Ahead of them, Chloe and Zoe, bright splashes of red against the tranquil green, chased a dragonfly near a stone lantern. They were laughing. The sound was precious, a testament to the brutal choices she had made to keep it in her world. They were safe. Ryota stood beside her. He didn't touch her, but the space between them was not empty. It was filled with a dense, silent understanding. He was watching the girls, but his focus, his entire presence, was anchored to her. She watched her daughters, a profound, aching sense of peace settling over the deep, permanent anxiety that now lived in her bones. This was it, the life she had chosen. A gilded cage, perhaps, but one where her children could laugh without fear. She turned her head, her gaze meeting his. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw no walls, no calculations, no ghosts in his eyes. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a promise of a happy ending. It was an acknowledgement of their beginning, an acceptance of a dangerous, beautiful, and absolute truth they now shared.